Cop confident in court against black woman until she reveals her role in powerful U.S. organization. The courtroom was silent, too silent. A thick tension hung in the air, pressing against the walls like an invisible force. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow over the polished wooden benches. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee, but beneath it was something sharper, the scent of anticipation, of justice hanging in the balance. At the front of the room, Officer Daniel Cross sat smugly in the witness stand, his crisp uniform unwrinkled, his badge gleaming under the harsh lighting. He lounged slightly, exuding confidence, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. He had done this before, many times. Another routine testimony, another suspect to bury under a mountain of evidence. But across from him, standing tall, was Maya Reynolds, a black woman in a navy blue blazer, poised and composed. Her gaze locked onto him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something far worse. Certainty. "Officer Cross," she began, her voice steady, calculated. "Are you sure about your sworn testimony?" The cop scoffed, flashing a condescending smile. "Of course." Every word, a slow nod, a knowing look. Then Maya slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward the judge. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanned the document, then froze. His lips parted, eyes flicking up to Cross. A shift rippled through the room. The officer's smirk faltered. Something was very, very wrong. Officer Cross leaned back in the witness stand, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ms. Reynolds, I've been in law enforcement for over a decade. I know what I saw that night." His voice was smooth, assured, laced with the kind of arrogance that comes from years of unchecked authority. Maya didn't flinch. She simply clasped her hands together, tilting her head slightly, studying him like a puzzle she had already solved. "The court appreciates your experience, officer," she replied, her tone measured. "But let's revisit the details, shall we?" Cross shifted in his seat, but the smirk never left his lips. In his mind, this was already over. He had given his version of events. The judge, an older man with a history of siding with law enforcement, would nod along like always. The jury would trust the badge. And Maya? She was just another defense attorney trying to make a name for herself. "You stated that my client resisted arrest," Maya continued, flipping through her notes. "That she was aggressive, uncooperative, and—" She lifted her eyes, pausing just long enough to make him uneasy. "Armed." The officer gave a casual shrug. "That's correct." Maya exhaled slowly, tapping a finger against the desk. "And yet, no weapon was recovered. No gunshot residue, no fingerprints on any firearm." Cross's jaw tensed for half a second, so quick, so slight, most wouldn't notice. But Maya did. The judge leaned forward, suddenly more interested. The jury exchanged glances. Maya let the silence stretch, thick and suffocating. Somewhere in the courtroom a pen clicked. A journalist whispered to their colleague. The power balance was shifting. And for the first time, Officer Cross felt it. A hush settled over the courtroom, the kind that made even the sound of a shifting chair feel deafening. Officer Cross's smirk had faded, just slightly. But Maya caught it, the first crack in his carefully constructed confidence. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor with deliberate precision. "You testified," she said, flipping to another page, "that my client reached for a weapon in her glove compartment. You wrote it in your report." She held up a printed copy. "Word for word." Cross licked his lips, shifting in his seat. "That's correct," he said, but his voice was tighter now, the arrogance slipping just beneath the surface. Maya nodded, as if she expected that answer. "And you're absolutely certain?" A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, crossed his face. "Yes." The judge glanced at the jury. They were paying closer attention now, some leaning forward, some scribbling notes. A journalist in the back stopped typing and simply stared. Maya let the silence linger, then turned to the bailiff. "Can you please play the dash cam footage?" Cross's head snapped up. His fingers curled into the armrests of the witness stand. His eyes darted, first to the judge, then to the prosecutor's table, searching for an escape. The bailiff pressed play. The grainy footage flickered onto the courtroom screen. Rain pattered against the windshield. The suspect, Maya's client, sat perfectly still in the driver's seat, both hands visible on the steering wheel, not moving, not reaching. The courtroom held its breath. Maya folded her arms. "Tell me, Officer Cross, where exactly in this video does my client reach for a weapon?" Cross swallowed hard. His knee bounced once before he caught himself. Maya tilted her head. "Take your time." But time was the last thing he had. The room was silent except for the hum of the dash cam footage playing. The screen showed the woman in the car, still, compliant. Nothing like the aggressive suspect Officer Cross had described in his sworn testimony. Cross's mouth opened, then closed. His hands clenched the wooden armrests of the witness stand. Maya took a step closer, her voice dangerously calm. "You said she reached for a weapon." She pointed at the screen. "But that never happened, did it?" The officer forced a dry swallow, his throat bobbing. "The footage, it must not be showing the right angle." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged glances. The journalist in the back, who had been typing furiously, stopped mid-sentence. Maya raised an eyebrow, letting the moment hang. "Not the right angle?" she repeated, her tone laced with quiet incredulity. She turned to the bailiff. "Can you rewind the footage? Slow it down." The screen flickered again, frame by frame. And then, something changed. The camera caught a movement, subtle but damning. Cross, his own reflection in the rain-slicked window, his arm reaching inside the car. Maya's voice sliced through the silence. "You planted a gun in her vehicle, didn't you?" A collective gasp filled the room. The jury sat up straighter. The judge's face darkened. Cross shot forward in his seat. That's ridiculous." His voice cracked at the edges. "I wouldn't—" Maya lifted a second piece of evidence, a still image extracted from body cam footage, a timestamp. His own hand, holding the weapon before it was ever discovered. "This is from your own body cam, officer." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "You tampered with evidence." The officer's face drained of color. His fingers twitched, betraying his panic. In the audience, a woman covered her mouth. A man whispered to his neighbor. The courtroom wasn't just watching anymore. They were judging. Maya let the weight of the revelation settle before delivering the final blow. "You lied under oath, and now the truth is right here for everyone to see." Cross gripped the edges of the stand like a man on a sinking ship, and for the first time he realized he was drowning. Officer Cross was unraveling. His once cocky demeanor had collapsed into sheer desperation. Beads of sweat gathered on his forehead. His fingers gripped the witness stand so tightly his knuckles turned white. This is being taken out of context," he stammered, his voice cracking. He turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, this is some kind of trick. Enough!" The judge's voice was cold, cutting through the room like a blade. His gaze was sharp, unwavering. "You're under oath, Officer Cross. Choose your next words carefully." Maya let the silence breathe. Let the weight of the moment press down on the man who, moments ago, believed himself untouchable. She stepped forward, locking eyes with him. "You thought your badge would protect you," she said, her voice calm, but carrying the force of a tidal wave. "You thought no one would question you, that your word would always win over hers." She gestured toward her client, who sat still, watching the man who nearly destroyed her life crumble. Cross opened his mouth, but no words came. "You framed an innocent black woman," Maya continued, her tone now razor-sharp. You weaponized the trust the public placed in you. And now you're not just a liar, you're a criminal. A stunned murmur swept through the courtroom. The jury sat frozen, the weight of her words sinking deep. A journalist's pen clattered to the floor. Even the bailiff, usually stoic, exhaled sharply. The judge leaned forward. Officer Cross, he said gravely, do you have anything to say for yourself? Cross was shaking now, his world collapsing around him. But it didn't matter. Maya had already said everything. The gavel slammed down. Officer Cross, you are hereby remanded into custody pending formal charges, the judge announced. The courtroom erupted. Not in chaos, but in a stunned, almost reverent silence. Maya exhaled, feeling the weight of justice finally tipping in the right direction. Her client sat motionless, hands trembling. Not with fear, but with the overwhelming realization that the nightmare was finally over. As officers escorted Cross away, his once confident stride was replaced with sluggish, defeated steps. The same system he had manipulated for years had finally turned against him. The badge that once shielded him was now meaningless. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras flashing like lightning. The headlines would write themselves, "Corrupt cop exposed in courtroom bombshell." But this was bigger than one officer's downfall. This was a shift in the tide, a moment that forced people to question how many others had suffered in silence, how many others had been buried under false reports and sworn lies. Maya turned to the cameras, her voice steady. This case isn't just about one man's corruption, it's about accountability, about standing up when the truth is on your side, no matter how powerful the opposition may seem. She met the lens directly. So I ask you, how many more Officer Crosses are still out there? And what will you do to stop them? The screen fades to black. Now it's your turn. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed injustice like this? Let's talk.